if you focus on leveraging the infrastructure, using infrastructure, not building it, not growing the chicken and being all excited about that, but actually building the application that people are going to consume. Presumably that's what the business needs. Then that sounds like, oh, so I do want to outsource to AWS and Azure and so on and use their stuff. But if it breaks the budget, if it breaks the bank and we can't control costs because we don't know what it's going to cost, then, it sounds like we're giving people two different messages here.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Ethan, because what happens is people are usually starting from the bottom, they go all the way to the top and they settle in the middle. So in the beginning, in step one, they're comparing their data center to AWS. And that's really not a fair comparison, because I often ask people, are you comparing public to private cloud? Do you even have a private cloud, or do you have virtualized chewing gum and duct tape? And then you're going to Amazon that's got the latest and greatest automated everything. To answer your question specifically, Ethan, the most successful repatriations that I see are not where you're bringing it back to your data center. You're bringing it back to someone else outside your data center that has some of the automation and some of the features you like in something like an AWS or an Azure, but it's outside of your four walls. And there's a neck to choke where there's a relationship that you can leverage and say, what in the heck happened last night, right? But it's not your problem. All of it is not your issue. If the switches go down, someone else is managing the data center, costs are more predictable, and you're kind of landing in the middle, right? You're not killing the chicken, you're not doing a rotisserie chicken, you're kind of in the middle. I am saving some time, but I'm also got more predictable costing.
You've improved your operations. You can deal with leverage automation. You can use APIs. You can spend more time focusing on applications. So we're not saying it's not a one or the other. That's a false dichotomy.
Absolutely.
It's some kind of a make the best of all the different pieces and process to end up where you need to end up.
I need to have a data center, but I don't have to be the one running the data center or staffing the data center or building the data center. And that's where I think there are economies of scale. I think people do get that lesson from someone like an AWS or an Azure. When you're doing this for many different clients, you do learn a lot of stuff. But I think a lot of us are realizing AWS and Azure are not Mary Poppins. They're not doing stuff out of the goodness of their heart for us. They're about profit. And sometimes we're on the wrong side of that because we can't understand where the value is not worth the cost anymore.
Right. It's not in their best interest to minimize your costs in their cloud.
Correct. What it is in their best interest to do, though, Ned, I'm glad you mentioned that. Sometimes it's in their best interest to incentivize us on the bottom end. If you look at the way a lot of this costing works out, and I have this conversation with CXOs a lot of this is a math problem. There are tipping points in almost every cloud provider where IaaS versus PaaS flips. On the lower end, often platform as a service for things like databases, for example, which I'm very, very much a fan of database as a service. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit later. There are tipping points in the beginning where database as a service is literally cheaper than running that database on IaaS on your own. But then later on, it flips very much the other way. What a lot of the cloud providers have done, Ned and Ethan, is they've taken the lower end stuff and made it loss leaders. They're giving away the cheap stores, they're giving away the small VMs, they're giving away the small PaaS options. And when you go higher up the stack to run your big boy production workloads there, sometimes PaaS is literally as much as 10x what an IaaS equivalent would be. I've done studies for people where they're giving away the equivalent of a DBA with every large database as a service option they're running. There are PaaS options in Amazon and Azure today where one instance of that, single AZ, will cost you $900,000. A whoops is a five-figure mistake. And so you have to think about, am I really saying that I can't run this any better than that? Or I can't find a managed service provider to run this any better? But because we trusted them at the low end, we drink the Kool-Aid at the high end.
Right. I've seen an interesting pattern of outside managed services taking advantage of the big public clouds, but instead of using the PaaS offering, they'll build it on IaaS and manage it for you.
Yes.
While you reap the benefit of having a managed service at a lower price point, like you were saying, when you start getting to that production grade of deployment.